So how do we actually know what this new heavens and earth is going to be like?
Well, let me first say that people get a bit confused when we talk about heaven and the new heavens and earth. Heaven is a place where believers who've died go to be with Christ and dwell with him, awaiting their physical resurrection in the new heavens and earth. So first, let's make that distinction. There's a description of the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. I'll read from it again in chapter 21 as an example. Mm-hmm. There are 12 gates, foundations of the walls made in jasper, sapphire, other precious stones, a city made of gold and pearls everywhere.
Specific descriptions.
Very specific descriptions. And of course, that's just a sample. There are more and more. But the most important thing to remember about the new heavens and earth is there's no more death. There's no more suffering. That's very much part of the world which we exist now. Revelation 21:4 says, and God will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more pain, neither sorrow nor crying, for the former things have passed away. The very last chapter of the Bible is talking about the New Jerusalem. It says, in the midst, there was the tree of life again. Where did we first read about that tree of life? Back in the book of Genesis, back in the Garden of Eden. So it's clearly talking about a restoration. And the new heavens and earth is the ultimate final point of God's plan for creation. This is the whole gospel tied up in this. There was a good creation. There was a fall. The universe was marred by sin, redemption through Christ, and restoration. So this is the final end act of the entirety of what we might call the gospel.
Before we continue, a quick heads up. Stick around until the end of the interview because we'll be giving away an excellent resource for free. You won't want to miss it. Now, back to the interview. Yep, so they're all very much joined together. You can't just take that end point or the start point very separate. There's a continuum right from beginning to restoration.
Well, again, let me quote from 2 Peter 3:13. But in keeping with his promise, we look for a new heavens and earth where righteousness dwells. Sin will not exist in the new heavens and earth too. That's another aspect.
The idea of death and suffering not being a part of our existence is probably very hard for us to imagine. You mentioned a curse, this curse that's going to be done away with. What is the Bible referring to here?
Yes, so in Revelation chapters 21 and 22, the last two chapters in the whole Bible, it's actually throwing back to the book of Genesis, and specifically Genesis chapter 3, where death and sin enter the world. We commonly call that the fall. So the restoration is the undoing of what went wrong. This is Satan's plan to foil God being undone at this particular point. And, there's an important theological aspect in this, because if it's just going to be some sort of ethereal realm in the future, and that's what God does, I'd say Satan wins, because there was an originally perfect Edenic world, a paradise, right? We don't live in that now, although there are some beautiful aspects of God's creation. So if God doesn't restore the new heavens and earth back to kind of what it was like originally in Eden, in what we read in the early chapters of Genesis, it's kind of like God going to plan B.
Which doesn't quite sound like him.
No, I don't think God does go to plan B. He has a plan right from the beginning, and his will be done.
And we hear that many times in Scripture, don't we?
Yes, exactly. So again, understanding it's got to be a physical realm because of that's what God made originally. And his plan is not going to be undone.
And so do your views of Genesis and this account that we're talking about, does that affect your views about the new heavens and the new earth?
It does. And that's why it's very, very much part of creation ministry in a way. And I've already mentioned the gospel. So, you mentioned I've done lots of events. And so lots of people like to come up and challenge myself and other speakers about their views. So theistic evolutionists, for example. So they are people that believe God used evolution to create a big bang and ultimately a process of death and suffering over millions of years where, you out-reproduce your competitors to get a survival advantage.
Because this is the theory of evolution.
Yeah. So I might say to someone a Christian who might believe in evolution, I'll say, do you believe there's going to be a restoration, a new heavens and earth? And of course they do. And I make a point and I say, well, there's going to be no death or suffering in that new heavens and earth. And if it's a restoration and you believe that God used evolution to create, are you looking forward to millions of years of death and suffering in the new heavens and earth? I mean, ultimately, to restore something is to restore it back to the way it was. Now, again, if that's the way God did it, that's what we're looking forward to. To be honest, that's not really much to look forward to, is it? Because that's no different from what we have in this world. What we're living with now is not a result of God's process of creation.
Yes.
It's a result of the fall and sin affecting his good creation where there was originally no death and suffering.
And isn't Genesis very clear about that creation being good and good and good and very good?
In fact, the term very good is interesting because, yes, we read on those other days it's good. The Hebrew term for very good is tov mi'od, which means finished, perfection, completion. So very good. I mean, we're talking about the creator of the universe saying something is very, very good. But again, we get back, there's a specific point when Adam and Eve sinned, the first humans sinned, and God says he'll put thorns and thistles in the ground. There'll be pain in childbearing. They're the things we experience now, but hopefully we're not going to look forward to having those again. They weren't originally there in the good creation.
Gary, that's such a powerful message. Is there somewhere where I can get more information about this?
Well, yes, because I actually have a DVD here called Creation Restored, and it can be streamed also from creation.com. And I believe the ministry is actually going to make this available to stream free by following the links that will be provided on this podcast.
And we'll make the link available in the description below. Gary, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been great.